My name is Lena Parker, and I'm 34 years old. 18 months ago, I sat in a lawyer's office and listened to a stranger read out loud that my parents were leaving me nothing. The house I had quietly paid for month after month for 6 years was going to my cousin. Every board, every shingle, every part of the roof, my money had helped keep over my mom and dad's heads. My mom held my hand while the lawyer read. She smiled at me the entire time. So I did something quietly, something nobody in my family noticed for a whole month. And when my mom finally texted me about the mortgage, my reply took 10 seconds to type and cost me everything I thought I couldn't live without. What happened afterward tore my family apart. But here's what none of them knew. I kept every receipt. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets come to light and quiet people find their voice. Grab your coffee, settle in, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from today. If stories about family, betrayal, and difficult boundaries speak to you, leave a comment and be sure to subscribe because this one begins in a parking lot in February. It started with a text from my mom the week before. "We're getting our affairs in order, sweetheart. We need you there Tuesday." I read that and felt something warm and foolish bloom in my chest. Needed. I took a half day off work, which, if you know accountants in February, is basically a kidney donation. I'm a CPA at a mid-sized firm in Columbus. Tax season doesn't stop for family. I stopped anyway. I drove 40 minutes north to Millbrook with a folder on the passenger seat. Inside were copies of their insurance policies, a summary of the mortgage, a list of account numbers, all organized with color tabs. I'd prepared it that morning. I thought I was going there to help. I thought they finally wanted the daughter with the spreadsheets in the room. The law office was above a dentist on Main Street, the kind of building where the stairwell smells like carpet from 1987. I climbed the stairs, rehearsing helpful things to say. Then I opened the conference room door and stopped. My Aunt Dana was already seated, her purse in her lap like a small dog. Next to her sat my cousin Tyler, 36 years old, wearing the blazer he wears to things he wants to go well for him. 2 cups of coffee were already poured. None was waiting for me. My parents sat across from them, and my dad was looking out the window at the parking lot like it owed him money. Why would my cousin be at my parents' estate planning meeting? I stood there holding my folder full of tabs, and the lawyer, a gray, careful man named Alan Whitfield, looked up and said, "Lena, thank you for coming. This isn't going to be easy." Whitfield opened a binder and read it plainly, the way you'd read a weather report for a storm hitting someone else's town. My parents had created a revocable living trust. Into it went the house on Maple Street, the checking and savings accounts, my dad's truck, all of it. Upon the passing of both of my parents, the sole beneficiary of everything in that trust would be Tyler Brooks, my cousin. Then Whitfield looked at me over his glasses and read the last part slowly. As for their daughter, Lena Parker, the trust made no provision intentionally, and the document said, "with love." With love. Somebody spent hours writing that. Whitfield explained why I was in the room at all. When parents leave a child out, he said, he advises telling that child face to face. It prevents ugly surprises later. It prevents challenges. It was, he said, the kindest way. I remember nodding because my body was still being polite, while the rest of me left through the window my dad was staring through. My mom reached over and took my hand in both of hers. Her hands were warm. They were always warm. And she said, "Nothing changes, sweetheart." She squeezed my fingers. "You'll still help. That's who you are." I looked at my dad. He hadn't met my eyes since I walked in. 67 years old, a mechanic his whole life, with hands like old leather resting on the table. He studied that parking lot like there would be a test on it later. Something about that frightened me more than the binder did. Across the table, my Aunt Dana smoothed her skirt and delivered the line she must have practiced in the car. We all agreed, it's what's fairest. To understand the word fairest, you have to go back 6 years. Tyler had a sandwich franchise then. He talked about it like it was a movement, not a shop selling turkey on rye next to a vape store. When it started sinking, he didn't come to me, the numbers person. He went to my parents. And my parents, without telling me a single thing, refinanced the house they had nearly paid off and pulled out $80,000 in cash to save Tyler's franchise. I found out after the papers were signed. I found out the same month my dad had his first hospital stay, when his heart first started its long argument with him. The numbers they had taken on were brutal. A new loan, $128,000, a 15-year term, right around $1,400 a month with taxes and insurance included. My dad's pension and their Social Security couldn't cover it, not with the medications piling up. The bank gave them 30 days to figure out the first payment. My mom didn't ask me directly for money. She did something more effective. She cried at her kitchen table with the statement in front of her and said she didn't know what they were going to do. Then she looked up at me. I was 28. I had just made senior at my firm. I said the words that would define the next 6 years of my life. I'll cover it for a few months until things settle. The franchise died anyway. Quietly, the way those things do. And here's the part I struggled with for years afterward. Nobody in the family ever knew the real number. $80,000 had gone into Tyler, and it was never discussed again. A few months became 6 years, 72 payments, the 28th of every month, $1,400 automatically. I set it up as an auto pay because I knew myself. If I had to press the button manually every month, someday I'd hesitate, and I didn't want to be the kind of daughter who hesitated. Over time, I added their cell phones to my plan. I added my mom's car insurance when the premium increased. When the roof needed patching 2 springs ago, the roofer's invoice came to my email. I paid for my parents' life the way you water a plant without ceremony, without being asked twice, and my own life slowly became smaller around it. I kept renting a 1-bedroom north of Columbus while my coworkers bought houses. I did the math on my best friend's destination wedding and sent a gift instead. Every Sunday dinner, my mom passed her phone around with photos of Tyler's kids and asked me with real tenderness if I was still managing to save a little. Here's the thing, though. I wasn't naive about it. I'm an accountant. Twice I asked to be put on the deed, or at least to sign a simple loan agreement, something in writing. Both times my mom looked wounded, and my dad rubbed his neck, and she said, "The house will be yours one day, honey." Why make it cold with paperwork? The refinance was already completed by the time I ever saw a document. The bank only wanted its money on time, and their 30-day window had left no room to restructure anything. So I paid first and negotiated never. The house will be yours one day. That was the promise that got destroyed in a conference room above a dentist. I believed it for 72 straight payments. Back in the conference room, I set my folder of color-coded tabs on the table and didn't open it. I asked one question. Why? It came out steadier than I felt, which is a skill you learn doing audits. It was my Aunt Dana who answered, not my parents, which told me everything about how this decision had been made. Tyler has children, honey. You're set. You've always been set. She said set like it was a diagnosis, like doing well was a condition I had that excused everyone else from ever considering me again. My mom nodded along. Then she added softly, like she was sharing something wise, that leaving the house to the one who needs it keeps a family close. Family gathers around need, she said. Tyler will fill that house with kids on Christmas morning. Tyler himself leaned back in his interview blazer and said, "You can still come for Christmas, Lena. Obviously. Obviously." I remember looking at each of them one at a time. The way you look at a balance sheet that will not reconcile, searching for the entry that explains everything. My dad was still at the window. I stood up, thanked Mr. Whitfield for his time, and said I had a quarterly deadline, which was even true. No shouting, no tears. I gathered my folder of tabs that nobody had asked to see. And I'll tell you a strange thing. My calm made the room angrier than yelling would have. Dana's mouth went thin. My mom's smile flickered like a bulb. People who script a scene where you cry don't appreciate it when you skip your lines. I was almost to my car when I heard my dad's voice behind me, ragged, calling my name across the cold parking lot. My dad came down those stairs too quickly for a man with his heart. By the time he reached me, he had to lean one hand on my trunk and breathe. 3 steps and a railing had exhausted him. That's how I learned, without either of us saying the word cardiologist, that things were worse than they had been telling me. "Lena," he said, "your mother and Dana, once they decide something, it's like arguing with weather." That was it. That was the whole defense of his silence in that room. I looked at him and saw a man who had spent 40 years fixing other people's engines and had never once in his life fixed an argument at the dinner table. Anger and love can sit in the same chair. It turns out they were both sitting in me. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pressed something into my hand. It was small and cold, a key. The key to his workshop behind the house, the shed where he rebuilt carburetors and hid from Thanksgiving. In case you ever need a place to think, he said. My dad had never said the word sorry to me in his life. He handed people keys instead. He opened his mouth to say something else. Then his eyes moved over my shoulder toward the office window, where the curtain shifted. He patted my trunk twice like it was a horse and went back inside. I sat in my car and put the workshop key on my key ring beside the house key I'd had since I was 16. Then my phone lit up on the seat with its polite little chime. A reminder from my bank. Upcoming transfer. $1,400 in 3 days. I stared at it for a long time. That night, back at my apartment in Columbus, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine I didn't drink and opened my banking app. I do reconciliations for a living. I find where the money went and make the two sides agree. For 6 years, I had never once run that report on my own life, and I think some part of me knew better than to look. I scrolled all the way back. There it was. A green column marching down the screen. The 28th of every month. $1,400 over and over. Past job changes and lease renewals, and 2 winters when I skipped replacing my snow tires. Mortgage. Phone plan, her insurance. The roof. $3,100 2 springs ago. On one side of the ledger, more than $120,000 of my life. On the other side, the word sweetheart and a promise that had just been notarized out of existence. Accountants have a term, uncollectible. There's a moment when you stop calling something an asset and admit it's a loss. You write it down, and the books finally tell the truth. My thumb hovered over the autopay screen, over the little link that said cancel. It would have felt good to press it right then, at 11 at night, with wine I wasn't drinking. I didn't. I put the phone face down on the table and went to bed because I'd learned something from my job, and it had never failed me. Never make a 6-figure decision angry late at night. In the morning, I wasn't angry anymore. In the morning, I was something my family had never seen from me before, and honestly should have feared more. I was thorough. Saturday morning. Coffee, laptop, legal pad. I made a list like I was offboarding a client because, in a way, I was. Item 1. The mortgage autopay, canceled in 4 taps. 6 years of my thumb hovering, and in the end, the bank didn't even ask if I was sure. Item 2. The family phone plan. I split their lines off to run through the end of the billing cycle I'd already paid, then transferred them to their own account. I'm not the kind of person who cuts off a 63-year-old woman's phone in the middle of the month. I'm the kind who reads the terms first. Item 3. My mom's car insurance, set to non-renew at the end of its term. Notice mailed to her address by the company itself. Item 4. The small savings bucket I'd labeled house emergency. $6,000 I kept for their roof and furnace surprises. I renamed it and moved it into my own savings. It's amazing how long a task takes when it's dread and how quickly it goes when it's simply clicking. 90 minutes, start to finish. 6 years unwound. I didn't text anyone an announcement. No speech. No ultimatum. No long ending with, I hope someday you understand. They had made their arrangements in a lawyer's office without me. I made mine at my kitchen table without them. And I want to be clear about one thing because it matters later. I didn't block a single number. Blocking is loud. Blocking is a door slam. And a door slam is still a conversation. I wanted the other thing. The thing my family had never once given me. Silence that simply doesn't show up. Then I put the legal pad in a drawer and waited for the 28th of the month. Here is what happened over the next 30 days. Nothing. That's the whole plot twist. And I promise it's the worst one in this story. Nobody called to see how I was doing after that meeting. Nobody texted to say that must have been hard to hear, or are we okay? My mom sent me exactly 2 messages in a month. One was a photo of Tyler's kids in matching pajamas, forwarded without comment. The other said, "Did you see Dana's birthday post?" with a thumbs up sticker. That was the complete harvest of a month. For 6 years, I told myself my family was busy. that love in the Midwest was quiet, that showing up was what counted, and I was the one who showed up. 30 Days of Silence ran a cleaner audit than I ever could. The calls I used to get were never about me. They were about the roof guy, the insurance card, the phone upgrade, the thing. Always the thing. And with no thing due yet, I didn't exist. And my life without the $1,400 going out and the guilt coming in got strangely quietly good. I went for runs again. I made dinner for one and ate it slowly, sitting down like a person. I looked at a listing for a little house with a porch and let myself want it for a whole minute. Turns out, when you stop paying, you find out quickly what the calls were really for. The 28th came. The 28th went. My phone stayed dark. March 1st. Nothing. The grace period on their loan ran to the 16th. And I knew that date the way you know your own birthday. The 16th passed in silence, too. Then, on a gray Tuesday in early April, my phone buzzed. Before I tell you what that buzz was, let me ask you something. Honestly, if you've ever been the one who pays quietly while somebody else gets the credit, tell me in the comments what finally made you stop. I read every single one. And if you're new here, hit subscribe, because what my mom texted me that gray Tuesday is the reason I'm telling this story at all. I was at my desk at work, halfway through a client's inventory schedule, when the phone buzzed face up beside my keyboard. Mom, I looked at the preview, and the whole floor of my office went very quiet in my ears. The mortgage is due. That was the message. No hello, no my name, no question mark even. After a month of nothing, after 6 years of everything, my mother opened her phone, found my name, and typed the exact sentence you'd send to a bank teller. The mortgage is due. I sat with it for a while. My tea went cold next to the monitor. I thought about 72 transfers. Nobody ever said thank you for them. And a notarized document that said with love had left me with nothing. I typed a long reply about the meeting, about respect, about 6 years, and I deleted it. I typed a shorter one about the $80,000. Deleted that too. Explaining yourself to people who benefit from misunderstanding you is just another payment, and I had canceled my autopays. So I wrote back the only thing that was true and let it be the whole message. Not my problem. I hit send, put the phone in my desk drawer, closed the drawer, and finished the inventory schedule. And I want you to know my hands were almost steady. It took 11 minutes for the phone to start ringing inside that drawer. It didn't really stop for 3 days. The messages from my mom came in stages, like grief. If grief were mostly about a payment schedule, stage 1 was disbelief. Lena, did you get my text? The mortgage is due. Call me. Stage 2 was, this isn't funny. Stage 3 arrived that evening, and I'd been waiting for it the way you wait for a storm the radio already promised. After everything we've done for you. I read that sentence twice, sitting on my kitchen floor, and I laughed once, one dry sound, alone in my apartment. Then came stage 4, the one designed to work. Your father's heart can't take this stress. Think about what you're doing to him. That one I made myself read only once. I answered a single call that week because it was her, and because 34 years of wiring doesn't rip out in a month. Her voice was calm and reasonable, her church voice, and she said, "Honey, family doesn't keep score." I looked out my window at the parking lot of my building, 3 floors down, 40 minutes from the house my money had been holding up. Then why does the scoreboard only ever show what I owe? I said gently. I meant it gently. She was quiet for a second, and then she said we'd talk when I calmed down, which was interesting since one of us had raised her voice on that call, and it wasn't me. I said, "Good night, Mom," and hung up while she was still talking politely. The way you leave a meeting that should have been an email. Then she did the thing that changed the war. She took a screenshot of my text, "Not my problem," and sent it to the family group chat. By Sunday, my Aunt Dana had a complete version of me ready to distribute. Dana called me on a Sunday after church, which was strategic. She'd have witnesses to her patience. "Lena," she said in the voice she uses to run bake sales, "I'm going to say this with love. Family isn't a ledger. Family isn't a ledger. Write that one down because it comes back later in the story, and when it comes back, it matters." She talked for 11 minutes about duty, about how her sister, my mother, cried all weekend, about how ungrateful was not a word she wanted to use. She gently placed the word ungrateful on the table like a casserole. I said, "Okay, Dana. At reasonable intervals, calm is free, and it drives a certain kind of person insane. I'd rather not say how much I enjoyed learning that." By Monday, I was out of the family group chat. Removed, not left. A cousin in Indiana I hadn't spoken to in 2 years texted me, "Heard you cut your parents off. Wow." Somebody's wife I met once at a funeral unfollowed me. The story moving through my family was clean and simple. Selfish Lena, doing well, sitting on money, letting her parents lose their house over a grudge about paperwork. Nobody in that version mentioned 6 years of payments because nobody knew. Quiet help is invisible help. I had designed it that way out of some idea about dignity, and now the invisibility was being used as the whole case against me. One person broke the pattern. My Uncle Pete, my dad's brother, a retired electrician who says maybe 40 words a year, texted me exactly this: "Two sides to every roof, kiddo. Call me sometime." I cried a little at that one, standing in my kitchen. Then Monday morning, the receptionist at my firm called my desk. "There's a Tyler Brooks here to see you." Tyler stood in my firm's lobby holding a knit hat in both hands like a man auditioning for the role of Humble. He'd driven 40 minutes on a workday, which for Tyler is a moon landing. "Lena, be reasonable," he opened. Not hello. "It's just a few payments till we figure things out. You know, I'm good for it." I asked him what he'd figured out so far, and it turned out what he'd figured out was me resuming forever. Then, because Tyler cannot help himself, he showed me the whole card. He and Megan had put a deposit on a bigger house across town, 4 bedrooms, good school district. "Counting on how things are structured now," he said, actual words in my lobby under my firm's logo. Structured. My parents were alive, breathing, eating dinner in that house on Maple Street, and their nephew was already spending it. "Let me make sure I have this right," I said quietly, because the receptionist was pretending very hard not to listen. "You're spending an inheritance from a house 2 living people still sleep in." His face did something complicated. "You make everything sound ugly," he said. "I make things sound like what they are," I said. "It's a gift and a curse." I went back to my desk and finished my day. And I was fine, until I got home to my apartment that night and stood at my kitchen counter and looked at my key ring. The house key was still on it, brass, worn smooth, cut for me at 16 so I could let myself in after practice. I slid it off the ring. It took a second. Key rings fight you. They always fight you. And I dropped it in the junk drawer and shut the drawer with my hip. The next morning, my dad called, and my dad does not call. "There's a diner by the old parts store on Route 9, he said. 11, just us." I drove up. He was in the corner booth with coffee he wasn't supposed to have, and he slid a laminated menu toward me like a peace treaty. For a while, he talked about nothing. Spark plugs, a neighbor's terrible new fence. Then he set his cup down and told me a story I had never heard in 34 years. "When your grandma got sick," he said, meaning my mom's mother, "it was your mother who moved in. 4 years. Nights, diapers, doctors. Dana was busy. Dana had Tyler. Dana sent cards. Your mother spent her whole wedding fund on your grandma's care. Every dollar. And when your grandma died, the house, what was left, went to Dana's side anyway because Dana needed it more." He looked at his hands. "Nobody ever thanked her. Not once. She waited to be seen, kiddo, and it never came." And something in me shifted. My mother had been me 30 years before me and had come out of it believing the machine was correct. The only mistake was expecting anything back. She wasn't repaying her own debt. She was passing it down to me with interest. It didn't excuse one thing she'd done. It explained every single thing she'd done. And there's a difference. Both can be true. At 11 in the morning, in a diner on Route 9, my dad reached across and put his hand over mine. "I'm going to fix it," he said. "Give me a little time." When he stood to leave, he had to grip the edge of the table twice before his legs agreed. Spring turned into summer, and the machine did what machines do. Through Uncle Pete, because I heard everything through Pete, I learned the first real bank letter had landed on Maple Street. 90 days behind. Words like default and acceleration. Words from my textbooks sitting on my mother's hall table under her praying hands figurine. My mom told the family the bank had made an error. She said it at a cookout, apparently with a straight face while the propane hissed. The bank had made a 90-day, $4,200 error in her disfavor and would be sorting it out shortly. Dana convened a family meeting about the situation. I know because I wasn't invited to it. And I know how it ended because Pete called me afterward with the flat voice of a man reporting weather from a state he's glad he doesn't live in. Their conclusion, and I want you to hear the actual sentence, was this: Lena will come around. She always does. Not, we should call Lena. Not, maybe we got something wrong in that lawyer's office. Just, she always does. Said the way you'd say the sun rises in the east. Because that's what I was to them. Not a daughter, a natural law, a utility you build the whole grid on and never once check the bill. And Tyler, heir to the entire estate, seed of the family's future, contributed to the arrears that summer a sum I can report exactly, $0. The man had a deposit down on a 4-bedroom and couldn't find 1 month for the roof he was inheriting. I wrote none of this to any of them. I ran my miles, did my job, watered my one plant. Then, on a Tuesday in August, my phone rang at 4 in the morning. Nobody calls with good news at 4 in the morning. It was my mom's number, and her voice had no church in it at all. Just fear stripped down to the studs. It's your father, Riverside General. Come. I was dressed and on Route 23 in 9 minutes. And I'll tell you what I thought about in the dark with the wipers going because it surprised me. Nothing about money. Nothing about the trust. I had stopped paying their bills, and it had cost me my seat in that family. But I had never once stopped being his daughter. And the difference between those two things, which my family could not see, was the entire conflict. Heart failure, the cardiologist said, decompensated. Which is a word that means the argument my dad's heart had been having for 6 years was ending, and not in his favor. The ICU at 5 in the morning is all beeps and blue light. My mom saw me step off the elevator, and I watched her face do a terrible kind of arithmetic. Relief, then guilt, then the ledger. Always the ledger. And the first thing my mother said to me across that hallway was, "Did you bring your checkbook or just yourself?" I stood very still. "Just myself," I said. That's what's left. Then I walked past her, sat down beside my dad, and held his mechanic's hand, careful around the lines, until the sun came up over the parking garage. One more thing happened that morning. A nurse came in to check his lines, moving quietly and confidently. When she turned, I saw it was Megan, Tyler's wife. Our eyes met over my sleeping father. She didn't smile, and she didn't look away either. Near dawn, my dad's eyes opened, and he pulled me close. His voice was mostly air. I had to put my ear almost against his mouth. Even then, I nearly missed it. "You were never the bill, Lena." That's what my father spent his strength on. Not an apology. Not an explanation. No mention of trusts, lawyers, or houses. You were never the bill. Then his hand went slack around mine and he slept while the monitor continued its steady rhythm. I sat back in that vinyl chair and looked at him. I understood that he had seen everything. All 6 years of it. Every transfer. Every Sunday. I wrote the checks, passed the potatoes, and he had said nothing. His silence and his love were two trains running on the same track his whole life, and they never collided until then. 2 days later, he died in his sleep. The nurse said it was peaceful. People always say that, and I've decided to believe her. He never got his little time. Whatever he had meant by "I'm going to fix it" stayed unfinished, a wrench set down in the middle of a job on a workbench. And I told myself, that was that. Grief, it turns out, doesn't reconcile. I do that for a living, and I couldn't make one column from that week agree with any other. Then, standing in the funeral home hallway 2 days later, numb and holding a folder of his service songs, I overheard my Aunt Dana around the corner on her phone, using her bake sale voice with Alan Whitfield's office. She wanted to know, and this is a quote I will carry to my own grave, whether Ray's passing changed the trust at all. My father was not yet in the ground. The estate sale of me had already reopened for business. We buried my dad on a Thursday. Sunny, unfair weather for it. The reception was in the church hall. Casseroles, drip coffee, and 30 relatives balancing paper plates. I moved through it like staff, refilling the coffee urn because hands that are busy can't shake. Dana gave a beautiful eulogy. She really did. Then she got a room full of grief and coffee, and she couldn't resist the audience. She stood in the middle of the hall, voice pitched to Carrie, and said to a half circle of relatives, "Well, Some of us were here for Ray all along, and some of us have money for a new car, but not for their own dying father's roof. Fork stopped. 30 faces did the math and arrived at me. My car, for the record, was 6 years old. Bought used. But a good lie needs props more than facts. I felt the flush rise up my neck. I felt the old wiring turn on. Defend, explain, itemize. Then I felt something newer and colder take the wheel. I set down the coffee pot. I looked at Dana across that church hall, across the casseroles, and said at exactly the volume of a spoon against a saucer, "Ask my mother what the refinance 6 years ago was for. That's all." Then I picked the pot back up and refilled Mrs. Alvarez's cup. The room made a sound like a held breath because half of them had never heard the word refinance connected to that house in their lives. Dana's face flickered just once, like a screen losing signal. Outside on the church steps 10 minutes later, my Uncle Pete caught up to me, coffee in hand, and said quietly, "What refinance, Lena?" I told him on the steps in the tone I use for audit findings, because that tone is the one thing that has never failed me. 6 years ago, Tyler's franchise was dying. Mom and Dad refinanced a house they'd nearly paid off and gave him $80,000. And it's all there in the county records for anyone who wants to check. New loan, $1,400 a month on a mechanic's pension. The bank gave them 30 days, and I picked up the payment so they wouldn't lose the house. And I made that payment every month for 6 years. 72 payments. More than $100,000 on the mortgage alone, closer to $120,000 with the phones, insurance, and roof. 2 of my cousins had drifted over behind Pete the way people move toward a down power line. I took out my phone, opened the banking app, and turned the screen around. One screen. No speeches. The green column, the 28th of every month, marching back farther than the screen could hold. I don't do cash under the table, Uncle Pete. I do statements. Pete looked at that screen for a long time. He's an electrician. He spent 40 years finding the exact place where a circuit quietly fails. And I watched him find it now. His jaw tightened. Then he said one sentence I'll keep forever. "You paid for the roof they sold out from over you." Then he handed my phone back like it was evidence, which it was. And he went inside, straight past the casseroles, straight to my mother's table. By Wednesday, the story and my family had flipped upside down. And my Aunt Dana learned what it feels like when the group chat is about you. Here's the thing about a family narrative. It holds right up until one person checks the math. And my family, it turned out, contained a title agent. My cousin Rachel pulls property records for a living. It took her one lunch break to confirm the refinance, the date, the amount, the whole shape of it, all public, all filed at the county. She posted the recorder page to the group chat I was no longer in with no caption. Pete told me the chat went silent for a full day, which in my family is a constitutional crisis. Then the questions started, and they weren't aimed at me. Dana tried. She has always tried admirably. It was an investment in family, she said. It was nobody's business. Lena is twisting things. But every answer sounded worse than the question, the way it does when the numbers are sitting right there. And slowly, cousin by cousin, aunt by aunt, my family did something I had genuinely stopped expecting. It turned around. The wow cousin from Indiana texted me a paragraph of apology that I read 3 times. Mrs. Alvarez from the church sent a card. And one quiet Tuesday night, a number I didn't have saved lit up my phone. "I'm sorry. I didn't know about the $80,000. Tyler told me it was a small loan years ago. I believe you." It was Megan, Tyler's own wife, the nurse who had checked my dying father's lines, apologizing to me from inside the house that was supposed to become hers. I sat with that message for a long time. Vindication, I learned that fall, tastes like cold coffee, necessary and bitter, nothing like the advertisements, because being right pays no bills. In October, a sheriff's deputy climbed the porch steps on Maple Street with a foreclosure summons. Ohio handles foreclosure through the courts, slow and formal, a machine with paperwork at every tooth. Complaint, summons, 28 days to answer, then judgment. Then the county schedules a sheriff's sale on the courthouse steps. I knew the timeline cold, and for the first time in my career, the timeline was happening to my childhood bedroom. One by one, every exit my mother reached for turned out to be painted on. Borrow from family. The family had seen the county records. Now nobody was willing to pour savings down what one cousin, unkindly but accurately, called Dana's well. Sell the house before the sale. My mother refused to list it. It's Ray's house, she told Pete. I won't have strangers in Ray's house. Apparently, she preferred the strangers the county was about to send. Tyler had problems of his own by then. The deposit on the 4-bedroom was gone, forfeited, and the credit cards he'd been living on while waiting for his structured future had started calling him, the way banks call politely at first, then hourly. And Megan had gone quiet on him in a way that any married person can tell you is the loudest sound in a house. Dana floated the idea of a payment plan funded jointly by the family, and the family jointly discovered previous commitments. Here's what nobody did, though. In all those weeks of scrambling, meeting, praying, and blaming, not one of them called me to say the word sorry. They worked on ways to get the money. They never once worked on the apology. Pete confirmed this because I asked him directly, and Pete doesn't soften things. It's why I love him. So, when my phone finally rang with the law office's number on a cold afternoon in January, I already knew 2 things. They were out of options, and I was the last door. Before I tell you what they offered me in that office, be honest with me in the comments. Would you have paid to get your childhood home back? Sit with that for a second, because I only got one chance to answer. And if this story has you holding your coffee a little tighter, subscribe now because you're about to find out how it ends. Same building above the dentist, same conference room, same long table, and I swear, the same coffee. My mother was there in her good coat. Dana sat beside her, subdued in a way I'd never seen. Tyler was in the blazer, thinner, and Alan Whitfield, careful as ever, laid it out. As the surviving spouse, my mother had full authority to amend her share of the trust. He confirmed it plainly. And so the offer was this. The loan could still be reinstated before the sheriff's sale. Arrears, late fees, the bank's attorney costs, just under $20,000. The account would become current. Foreclosure dismissed. House saved. If I paid it, my mother would sign an amendment that same afternoon, already drafted and sitting in a folder in front of Whitfield. The house on Maple Street would go to me, signed, notarized, witnessed, everything I'd wanted for 6 years, everything in a manila folder 18 inches from my hand. Then my mother reached across the table and took my hand in both of hers, warm as ever, and smiled at me with her eyes full. You see, it was always going to be yours. Nothing changes, sweetheart. Nothing changes. The exact words from the day they erased me, offered back now as comfort. And I felt them land somewhere very cold and very clear. Everyone around that table thought they were watching a reconciliation. I was the only one who could see the price attached to it. I told them I needed 24 hours, and I drove back to Columbus alone. That night, I did the only thing I know how to do with an impossible decision. I put it into 2 columns. Take the deal. Get the house with the magnolia my dad planted the year I was born. The kitchen door frame with my heights penciled up it, the porch where I learned to read, get my mother 63 alive, the only one I will ever have, holding my hand again. $20,000, I had it. That was the obscene part. I had it sitting in savings, the down payment I'd been building for my own someday house, 1 wire transfer, and I'm the daughter who saved Maple Street. Column B, walk away. Keep the money, lose the house forever, and lose her. Probably this time for good. I stared at those columns past midnight, and being an accountant finally paid off in a way school never promised. I noticed something about column A. Every line in it was a noun. House, magnolia, doorframe, mother, and every line in column B was a fact. 72 payments, no thanks. A trust that erased me with love. A month of silence, then a bill by text message. Nothing changes, sweetheart. Nouns against facts. The nouns were beautiful. Nouns always are. That's their job. And I wanted them so badly my stomach hurt. And I understood, staring at my own handwriting, that the deal wasn't selling me the nouns at all. Reinstating the loan meant reinstating me. The wallet with a pulse, back in her seat, $1,400 a month forever. Forgiven exactly as long as I stayed useful. Same product, new packaging. I closed the notebook. Then I got in my car at 1 a.m. And instead of my bed, I drove north to Millbrook, to the one door I still had a key to. The workshop behind the house on Maple Street smelled like my whole childhood. Motor oil and cedar and cold concrete. I hadn't been inside since before the funeral. I stood in the dark for a second, then found the pull chain light my dad never upgraded, and the bulb swung shadows across the pegboard, every tool outlined in marker, a mechanic's museum. And there, on the workbench, up on sawhorses, sat something I had never seen. A porch swing, half-built, oak slats planed smooth, joints cut and dry-fitted, clamps still on, waiting for glue that never came. My dad had been building a porch swing in his final months with a heart that emptied him after 3 stairs, and he had never mentioned it. Then I saw the pencil marks on the crossbeam, his blocky mechanic's handwriting shakier than I remembered. I read it, and I sat down slowly on his stool. For Lena's front porch. Whenever she finds home. Whenever she finds home. Not for the house. Not for Maple Street. My father, who never learned the language of apology, had spent his final strength on lumber, telling me the one thing the trust, the lawyers, and my mother never would. Home wasn't the house I'd been paying for. Home was somewhere ahead of me. Unbuilt mine. This was his fix. Not an amendment. Not a signature. Permission. I cried then, the way you cry when nobody can hear it, with my sleeve pressed to my mouth, sitting in sawdust at 2 a.m. Then I stopped because he'd have wanted me to check the joinery. And I did. It was perfect, of course. I turned off the light and locked the door. The next afternoon, I walked back into Whitfield's office, where all of them were waiting, and I set one envelope on the table. 4 faces watched that envelope. And I watched them watch it because I've sat across enough tables to know that what people expect to see tells you everything. My mother looked at it with soft, rising relief. Dana looked at it with hunger she'd have called concern. Tyler simply looked at it the way he looks at everything, like it might be for him. Whitfield professionally looked at nothing. It wasn't money. I slid it across, and my mother opened it with her thumb, still half smiling, and pulled out a single printed page and a small brass key. The page was a statement I'd built myself the night before. My proudest piece of accounting. Every transfer, 6 years of them, date and amount, the 28th of every month, 72 lines, and at the bottom, in the reconciliation column where the balance goes, there was no number at all. Just a short phrase typed where the total belongs. Paid in full. The key was the house key, brass, worn smooth, cut when I was 16. Retired from my key ring back in the spring. My mother looked up, lost, and I kept my voice at the level I'd use to walk a client through a difficult return, because that voice is the truest thing I own. I'm not reinstating the loan, I said. I'm not taking the amendment. No. Dana's breath came in sharp. I kept going, still level. You're not selling me a house today. You're selling me back my seat at this family's table at $1,400 a month for the rest of my life. I already paid 6 years for a chair nobody saved. My mother's hands had gone still on the table, and something behind her face was moving now. Slow, like ice starting to melt from a roof. The house was never the inheritance, I said. I was the estate, and you spent me. Silence. The radiator ticked. Then, because some rooms you only enter once, I turned to my aunt. You told me family isn't a ledger, Dana. You were right, it isn't. I stood and pushed my chair in, and the last of it came out no louder than the rest. But you're the ones who kept sending me the bill. And that was finally the moment my Aunt Dana rose from her seat, and the calm that had held that family together for 60 years came apart in one afternoon. I want to tell you what the end of a family religion sounds like because I was there. It sounds like a bake sale voice cracking through its surface. Dana on her feet? No church left in her at all? You smug little after everything this family. You sit there with your spreadsheet like some, you don't get to decide what family owes. The sentences kept collapsing under their own weight. And I understood, watching her, that her fury wasn't really about the 20,000. I was breaking the rule that had organized her entire life. The strong ones pay and the needful ones receive. And if I could simply refuse, then it had all been optional all along, her whole belief system. And she could have refused too, once and hadn't. Tyler was talking underneath her, a wet jumble about his girls, about the school district, about how I was making everything ugly again. I didn't answer either of them. There was only one person at that table I owed a goodbye. My mother hadn't yelled. She was looking at the statement, at 72 lines of the 28th, and when she finally spoke, her voice was small and painfully clear, and the room became quiet for it. "I gave my mother my wedding fund," she said. 4 years of my life, nights, everything. Nobody thanked me either." She looked up at me, and for 1 second I saw all the way past the church voice, past sweetheart, to a 20-some girl holding a dying woman's hand in a house that would never be hers. That's what daughters do, Lena. We hold the family up. There it was, the entire machine laid out on the table beside the key. And she wasn't wrong about her own life. That was the terrible part. Someone should have thanked her. Someone should have divided that old house fairly. Nobody did, and she'd been billing me for it ever since. "I know, Mom," I said. And I made it gentle because it was the last soft thing I had, and I gave it to her on purpose. Somebody should have thanked you. You don't heal that by doing it to me. Then I thanked Mr. Whitfield for his time, and I walked out of that office past the dentist's smell and down into the January air, and I did not look back. And losing everything I'd wanted felt exactly like finally being able to breathe. 6 weeks later, the county sold my childhood home on the courthouse steps. I didn't go. Pete went out of some sense that a Parker should witness it and called me afterward from his truck. "It took 11 minutes," he said. "A man in a quilted vest, an investor with a folder of properties, bid about 2/3 of the appraised value the way they do, and a deputy read numbers into the cold." And that was that. Maple Street sold to a stranger between a parking ticket and lunch. The mechanics of what came after, I can report like the accountant I am. The sale money went first to the bank, then to the fees, the county, the attorneys, the system feeding itself. What trickled out the far end went to my mother, and it was not nothing, but it was not a legacy, and rent and living would consume it in a few short years. The famous trust, the one read aloud to me above the dentist's office, still existed. Technically, it now held a truck and some furniture. Tyler's entire structured future had come down to a document with nothing left inside it, a frame around a hole. And Tyler's own arithmetic came due the same season. Forfeited deposit cards maxed against an inheritance that no longer existed. And Megan, who had apologized to me from inside that marriage, packed the girls and went to her mother's in Toledo to think, she said. I took no pleasure in the girls' part of it. The rest, I'll let you judge me. I felt the way you feel watching a car you warned somebody about finally throw the rod. Dana called my mother reckless. My mother called Dana a schemer, and the two sisters who had agreed it was fairest stopped speaking to each other over whose fault the fair thing turned out to be. Not my problem, as somebody once texted. And yet when the dust settled, exactly one person in that family showed up with a truck and boxes to move my mother out. But I did it my way, not theirs. I drove my mom to the senior apartments on the east side of Millbrook myself on a Saturday in a rented pickup with her life in 14 boxes. I helped her fill out the application the week before, sitting side by side at Pete's kitchen table, my pen, her signature, income lines and references, the things I'm good at. What I did not do, and will never do again, is pay. I told her that plainly in the truck, both of us watching the road because it was easier than watching each other. I'll drive you. I'll carry boxes. I'll do your paperwork forever. It's the family discount, a breath. But I won't pay you to love me. I tried that for 6 years, and you kept the money and canceled the love. And I'm the only one of us who noticed it was a bad deal. My mother sat very straight in the passenger seat in her good coat and looked out the window at the town going by and said nothing. And for once, her silence didn't cost me anything. We carried boxes up in the elevator, mostly quiet. She told me where to put the praying hands figurine. I put it there. It wasn't warm, but it was true, and I'd take true. On my way home, I drove down Maple Street one last time. Slow, no signal, no stopping. The magnolia was bare. There were new curtains in my old bedroom window, and the porch light was on. Somebody else's yellow warmth spilling onto somebody else's steps. I sat at the stop sign an extra second, and I waited for it to gut me. And here's what I can tell you actually arrived. The porch light wasn't ours anymore. It never really had been. It had been mine, one transfer at a time, 72 months of mine. And now, for the first time since I was 28 years old, it was nobody's dead at all. I drove the 40 minutes back to Columbus with the radio off and the windows cracked and the cold felt clean. That was months ago. Here's where everything landed. This spring, I signed my name at a title office, and this time, the house on the paperwork was mine. Small blue-gray, 2 bedrooms on a quiet street outside Columbus, a front porch that faces west. The loan officer said my finances were the cleanest she'd seen all year, and I laughed harder than the joke deserved. The payment is almost exactly what I used to send up Route 23 every month. Same money. It just finally changed direction, like a river coming back to its bed. My mom and I have coffee on Sundays now, sometimes at her apartment, an hour, no more. We talk about her neighbor's cat and the church bulletin and never about Maple Street. It is a small relationship, small like a coffee cup, and it is honest. And those are 2 things it never was before. She has never said sorry. I've stopped waiting, the way you stop waiting for a check you've written off, and some visits. When she pours my coffee before I ask, I let that be what it is. Dana doesn't speak to me, and I have made my peace with the peace. She tells her version at church. Pete tells the other version at cookouts, and the family sorts itself accordingly, which is all a family ever does. Tyler is in Texas working warehouse construction, sending Megan money for the girls. Megan texts me sometimes photos of my little second cousins, and I answer everyone because those girls are going to grow up watching how the women in this family get treated, and I intend to be a different example on that screen. And the porch swing came home with me in the rented pickup, wrapped in moving blankets like a patient. I finished it in my new garage over 3 weekends, glued the joints he'd fitted, sanded where his pencil marks were, though I sealed the crossbeam instead of sanding it because some handwriting you keep. It hangs on my porch now, facing west. I sit there in the evenings with tea in the house my own money bought. On the swing my father built for a home he knew I hadn't found yet. And most nights, that's enough. Some nights I still cry in the shower over all of it. The house, my dad, my mother's warm hands. And that's the truth, too. And I've decided the crying is simply the last of the old payments leaving the account. If I've learned one thing worth passing down the family line, it's this. Walking away from a debt that was never yours isn't abandoning your family. It's the first payment you ever make on your own life. That's my story. 72 payments, 1 text from my mom, 1 cold reply, and a porch swing my dad never got to finish. So I finished it. If someone in your life treats your love like a bill, you're allowed to close the account. Share this with somebody who pays quietly. Tell me in the comments what you would have done at that table. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.